right, so as I said, we have a great lineup today. Our first speaker is James Staten. He is the Vice President of and Principal Analyst at Forrester. And I was looking through his bio here. It's quite long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I did want to comment that he has over 20 years of experience in a lot of different areas. In different industries. He's served as a reseller and a strategist for various companies, chief marketing officer. It's quite varied, actually. A journalist. He's been analyst for companies like Autodesk, Azul System, Gartner, Rockwell International, Sun Microsystems. He speaks at a lot of industry events like this one. And I think what's most interesting, and the reason why I think he's an excellent choice to lead off our conferences, he's been named the top cloud analyst by various organizations each of the last 5 years. So that gives him, in my book, a lot of credibility. And I would like to welcome James Staten. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Appreciate it. Great. Thank you all for joining and fighting through traffic to get down here. So nice to know that PG&E is taking care of us by blocking all of our roads. That's always a fun thing to do living here in the Valley. So let's get right into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you today about the state of the market. Where are we? What are enterprises actually doing with this stuff? How mature is this technology as of today? And then I'm going to show you about what the state of the technology currently tells us about what it's going to be looking like in the future. So without any further ado, let's go through a bottom line of where we are right now. So the first and most important thing to take away from this is that the people who are consuming the cloud right now continue to be business people and developers, not central IT. So the people that are going out and consuming SaaS applications, this has been true since Salesforce launched initially, which is now 15 years ago. It is the business people. Salespeople need a CRM system. Salespeople go and get it. Human resources people want to have a simple main of managing people and capital. They go out and they get a human capital management system on their own. It is the business people that are bringing this stuff in. Where the developers have come in, has happened in the last 7 to 8 years, is where developers are saying, I need a place to put my application, my custom application. I don't want SaaS, I want a platform. And they're going out and they are the ones who are bringing infrastructure as a service and platform as a service into the organizations. And when you look at what they are doing with it, they're doing a whole variety of things, most of what we call systems of engagement. So if you haven't heard that term, it came originally from Jeffrey Moore, who has written about crossing the chasm and inside the tornado and a bunch of other topics you probably have heard. He's a very well-known author and analyst to an extent, a researcher on this overall market. Systems of engagement are the types of applications that engage people. Whether they are your consumers, whether they are your partners, whether it is a B2B relationship of some kind. These usually are web-based applications, mobile applications, social media applications, and in many cases are sort of project collaboration applications. So that's a lot of what we see going out there in the cloud. Kind of the other things that we see in the cloud are applications that could take advantage of massive amounts of compute that I only need for a few hours. Good examples of that are business intelligence, particularly what you hear a lot of excitement around, which is real-time big data analysis. That's a huge amount of the applications we see up in the cloud. And high-performance computing, where you want just lots and lots of parallel compute capacity to crunch through enormous amounts of data. This may be for scientific reasons. We see a lot of pharmaceutical companies doing this. We see a whole lot of oil and gas companies doing this. And we see financial services firms doing this, where they're doing very, very deep scientific analysis. Now, the second big thing that you hear about in clouds and the current state of this is private clouds. This is what IT wants. And for the most part, they want a lot more than they're actually doing. And as a result, we end up with a term that I coined about 5 years ago. They are cloud washing their virtualization implementation. So when you look at companies and they say, yep, we've got a private cloud, pretty unlikely they actually do. More often than not, they've got a VMware environment that is a static virtualization environment. It is not a cloud. And we'll actually go into the difference between virtualization and cloud. It's not a bad thing that you want a private cloud. It's a bad thing if you stop at the static virtualization point and don't keep going further to actually become a cloud. And there's big differences between the two, and that's important to pay attention to. Now, another thing we are seeing also is we're seeing not only an effort to put private clouds in place, but we're seeing an awful lot of enterprises who are embracing the public cloud and are putting in place virtual private clouds, basically putting a secure wall around their resource or tenancy inside of a public cloud and allowing their developers to use that. And that's a topic you're going to hear much more about as the year goes forward. Now, when we look at the vendor community is in this odd position because a lot of the vendors that we are very familiar with have traditional businesses that run the risk of being disrupted by the cloud, because cloud absolutely is a disruptive technology. So if you're familiar with the concept of a disruptive technology from Clayton Christensen's writings, cloud matches that almost exactly. When cloud first came out, it was not appropriate for an enterprise to consume. It didn't meet their SLAs, didn't meet their requirements, was super cheap, and only appealed to a different buyer. In many cases, a business buyer or a small to medium business buyer or an individual developer versus a central administrator. Now, as it is maturing, it is starting to disrupt those core businesses. So everybody in the traditional space is looking at the cloud and saying, is this a linear change I can embrace? Or is this so disruptive that I really need to rethink how I approach this market? When we look at the three categories, there's ISPs, service providers, hosters, managed service providers, co-location companies, and telcos. That whole category there really wants cloud to be a linear change. Unfortunately, it is not a linear change. Are there some linear aspects to it? Yeah. They oftentimes thrive on things they can standardize, things they can automate, and things they can bill back. Cloud has all three of those characteristics. But the bill back is what is very different. And the degree of automation is very different. And there's this thing called self-service, which they've never really been comfortable with. So these are big changes for them, and they're really struggling with it. So again, we're seeing a significant amount of cloud washing happening in the ISP space. Now, if we look at ISVs, individual software companies who have on-premise applications are looking at what happened in SaaS. They're looking at what's happening in platform as a service. They're saying, which way should I go? Should I convert entirely into becoming a SaaS application? There's a lot of technical and business challenges associated with doing that. Or should I move to, say, a hosted ASP type of model where I just put my stuff on a cloud and all those economic benefits get applied to my application? Or do I have to do both? This is a real challenge for most of these companies, and they're trying to figure out, do I go this direction and try to reach a new buyer, or do I go this direction and try to reach my existing buyer? Because my existing buyer, if I play out disruptive technologies over time, will get taken away from me. And then the third part is management and infrastructure companies. Anybody who has a management tool of any kind or delivers some kind of infrastructure seems to think that the cloud is a linear move. And so you see the management vendors that say, oh, it's just another environment for me to manage, no problem. Oh, it's just something else I have to monitor. Look, there's a log stream coming through. Look, there's APIs I can use, no problem. Infrastructure vendors, oh, well, yeah, well, the cloud needs servers. Great, I make servers. The cloud needs CPUs. Great, I make CPUs. They just see this as a linear change and a great opportunity for them. But it actually entails much more and a much bigger impact because the type of servers the clouds buy are different. The type of CPUs they want are different. The type of infrastructure they want is different. And understanding those differences, capitalizing on those changes, that's the key to success in this market. We're very early on in this market. The disruptions are not so dramatic that we're seeing major companies tumbling. And so this is a very consternating period of time. Every company is trying to figure out how they're going to map to this. So let's start looking into this a little bit more of some of the data. So if we look at the adoption of cloud, 2012 so far is proving out to be quite a big year. We've seen significant increases in the adoption by enterprises of all three of the technology classes. SaaS is, of course, the broadest, and we'll spend a little time initially on that one. Infrastructure services jumped up quite a bit, and platform as a service has actually come up as well, but not to anywhere near the same degree. And I'm not going to cover the platform as a service topic specifically here, but look for more research on this topic from us in the coming months. Now let's look really at some examples, some real examples of what enterprises are doing with the cloud. Because it really is nice to see a bunch of stats, but until you see the people or meet the people behind it, they don't mean a whole lot. So the first one I'll show you is the US government. A lot of people don't think the government's doing a whole lot with cloud, and for the most part you'd be right. But there are pockets inside the government that are absolutely moving quickly. One of the organizations that is moving most quickly is the GSA. Those of you who don't know who the GSA is, this is the General Services Administration. It's sort of a central IT department or central services department for the federal government. One of their key initiatives is to get ready for new laws that are going to be taking place. And one of the laws they're getting ready for, of course, is the new healthcare law. And so to be prepared for this, they needed to set up a website that allowed you to put information about who you are and what your current health condition is into the system, and for it to spit out, according to the new law, who would be able to cover you, what amount of coverage you'd be available for, so that you could start feeling comfortable about what this new healthcare law would mean for you individually. And so you could actually go to healthcare.gov, and this is a cloud-based website that was created by business people who were interpreting the law, not by central IT and GSA, and they built this entirely on a public cloud service. And they did this for two big reasons. Number one is get to market fast. So they didn't want to have to worry about allocating servers and hiring developers and figuring out which middleware this should be based on. They went to a cloud that had a template already there, that had a data source that it could be easily dumped into, and they said, this is great, let's just go. And with the help of a little consulting group on the side, this site was up and running within 3 weeks from the time it was started. So speed was a big issue. Second thing they had to figure out is that we don't know how popular this site is going to be. This was built early in 2012 when the law hasn't passed. So how many people are really going to be interested in figuring out what the law is going to mean for them? And we don't want to have to revisit this project when the law goes into effect, when we know millions of people are going to hit this site. So they put it on an infrastructure as a service platform, which is pay-per-use for the resources consumed every hour the resource is consumed. That allows them to not worry about how much capacity is actually going to be needed, how popular the site's actually going to be. If there's only a few people on there, the bill is small. If there's millions of people on there, the bill is big, but justified. And that's the reason that they went to the cloud. The next one down is a company here in Silicon Valley called Ignite. If you're not familiar with this company, they're playing a very big disruptive role in the financial services market. So anyone here has worked on a trading floor or worked in an investment bank or had any background with that? So if so, you probably remember sitting at a desk behind a 2-screen event that said Bloomberg across the bottom. A big Bloomberg terminal that allowed you to get all this financial information from multiple sources so that you could make trading decisions. Well, that was a proprietary system. You had to buy the terminal. You had to subscribe to services through Bloomberg. That's how you got all your financial information. Ignite is disrupting that business. They have created a cloud-based service that runs on an infrastructure as a service layer. And what they do is they provide an API, a programming interface, that allows financial data streams to be flowed into this central broker model and then sent out to anybody with a browser. So no Bloomberg desktop needed anymore. Any computer will do, and you can have any financial stream that any commercial entity wants to provide to the financial market. So you can buy just a little bit, you can buy a whole lot, but you don't have to buy the terminal. You don't get locked in. And so this is a way, by using a SaaS type of model in a cloud platform, they can deliver financial data in a new disruptive way. The next one, you've probably heard of these guys, the New York Stock Exchange. This is a really interesting story. The New York Stock Exchange IT department has become a commercial business. And the way that they did this is they built a massive new data center in New Jersey where the New York Stock Exchange lives. So where all the trading executes and finishes up happens right there in that data center. Now, at the time that they built that data center, they saw large investment banks buying all the property around them. And they were building their own massive data centers right next door. Why were they doing that? Speed of light. The faster the trade, the more profitable the trade. And obviously, if I'm right next to the exchange, there's so little distance I have to cover. The speed of light's my friend. Now, that's great if we think that the only way to win in the financial market is to be a massive investment bank. Thankfully, we have this thing called the SEC, which kind of disagrees. The New York Stock Exchange kind of disagreed, and they said everybody should have the ability to do lightning fast trades. So what they did is they took a portion of their data center, and they laid down the VMware vCloud Director architecture on top of that and turned it into an infrastructure as a service. But a private one, a community cloud just for the financial market. So if you're a member of the New York Stock Exchange, you have the ability to trade directly on the exchange. You can rent servers in their data center on an hourly basis to trade at the same speed as a JP Morgan right next door or a Chase right next door. So that's a huge sort of equalizer of the market that they provided. And now a small financial bank, a hedge fund, and so forth, which really can only afford a few servers at a time, can actually trade at the same speeds as anyone else. Next is a company that's doing the same kind of optimization, for lack of a better term, and I probably should have said that word better, for the film industry. So any of you who worked in the film industry in the past? I was an extra and born on the 4th of July and ended up on the cutting room floor. That was thrilling. If you've been part of the film industry, their model has changed dramatically. They used to be very, very vertically integrated. So Warner Brothers in the old days hired all the actors, all the talent, owned all the cameras, owned everything involved, and people were on long-term contracts, and those teams would create movies. They don't do that anymore. What they do now is they take a pool of money that's been approved to create a film, and they drop it in the middle of the room and create an LLC around that film. And then freelancers from everywhere come together and they make that film. And when the film is over, they all disperse and disappear again. Now, there's a reason that they do this. Number one is that films have short shelf lives. And so if I was going to own a bunch of people and I was going to have to maintain them long term and pay their retirement and everything else associated with that, and if I would have to own a bunch of capital equipment, I'm talking about a 3 to 5 year commitment to everybody in there. And a film's average life is about 9 months of production, about 4 months in the theater if they're lucky, and then maybe 6 months of video. So that's a really short time frame. So that's why they're changing to this sort of dispersed model. Now, when you have a dispersed model, there's still some capital things you need when you're doing a film. You have to create a whole bunch of video, and you have to store that video somewhere. And then that video has to be handed out to special effects people, to people back at headquarters who say, no, this is no longer interesting as a vampire movie. Now it needs to be a zombie movie. Go reshoot the whole thing. You have a lot of people that have to touch this content. And then, of course, when the film is getting finished and put together, now you want to store that content so that you can distribute it out to all the theaters, and then you want to turn it into DVDs and so forth. All of this is capital intensive. But you don't have to own the capital, and you absolutely don't want to own the capital when the lifespan is so short. So what Attend does is Attend actually provides a cloud-based storage service, a secure, high-performance storage service that allows 3D HD quality video to be sent from the location that's initially shot up into the cloud, and then from there, the special effects people and everybody else accesses the files centrally. And the nice thing about this is it's on a per-month basis. It doesn't make sense to be per hour. And on that per-month basis, they can take as much capacity as they want. It can change the amount of capacity they're consuming on any single month through. And when they're done, pull it out of the cloud, throw it into the archives, you're done. And the cloud bill returns to 0. Next one down is Adobe. So Adobe's one of the ISVs who's looking at this space and saying, cloud's really good for my linear business. Cloud's also an opportunity for me to reshape how I do business with customers over time. So Adobe's doing multiple things in the cloud. One of the biggest things they're doing is what they call the Creative Cloud. The Creative Cloud is a way for you as a user of any Adobe product to put your files into a secure, safe, centralized place, and then from there, share it with everyone else. And the nice thing about this versus using, say, Box.net or Dropbox or these other things is that the Creative Cloud maintains your digital rights. So if you're the person who created that file, it's signed as your file. So if somebody else takes it down, the signature goes with it. They make sure that your integrity as a creative person is maintained inside of this collaborative environment. And this entire collaborative environment lives on a public cloud. So they can scale it up and down based on the amount of traffic that goes through and the amount of storage that's put up there. Now, they're doing 2 other really interesting things. If any of you have iPhones or Android phones and have downloaded any Adobe products recently, they are using the cloud to back end the small amount of compute capacity you have on your local machine in order to deliver you greater functionality. A good look at that is the Photoshop application available for the iPhone. When you go in there and say apply filter, apply effect, rotate, change, and so forth, if you're connected over Wi-Fi, it will take advantage of what's up there as well as what's down there on your device to make a decision about how quickly and most effectively can we deliver this solution to you. And they're getting ready to do the exact same thing with their desktop applications. And that's where they'll have even greater effect, because if you ever tried modifying a photo on your phone versus the power that you have in a workstation to do that, just imagine if you had 500 servers at your at your disposal. We're going to see a tremendous amount of change in their business as a result of this. The last one is the Apollo Group. Anyone here know who Apollo Group is? Who are they? Yeah, the University of Phoenix. So they are the largest online university in the United States. And they're doing some really interesting things on here. Now, they're a pure online business. You can think of them as SaaS. They do have some campuses, satellite campuses around the world that people tap into, but for the most part, they're an online university. You might think the first thing that they would be doing up here is delivering classes from the cloud. No, that's not what they're doing. They've got plenty of data centers for that. They've got really good video bandwidth, and they have a very nice system that they've established for doing that. That might be in the future for them, but what they're doing right now is making sure they offer the right classes. And so this is a very interesting use case, and one that we see a lot of other businesses use, and that's why I like to use it, because it's applicable outside of the education space. Basically what they do is they take a massive set of data that every time you finish one of their classes, they capture how many people were in that class, what kind of ratings were given to that class, were you there the entire time, were you satisfied with the content that you got in that class, did you go to the homework material, all this information to sort of gather how effective this class was. And this goes into a massive database, and it's actually an unstructured database. And they take cuts of this data to try and figure out what topics are most effective, what topics are not really as exciting anymore. So they sort of catch this waxing and waning of the student population. And this allows them to, on the fly, adjust the different courses that they offer. So they can talk to a professor and say, I know in the last couple of weeks you've been really concentrating on this topic, but we're seeing a high trend in interest in this topic over here, which is also something you cover. We'd like you to adapt your curriculum. This kind of adjustment on the fly allows the university to keep high retention rates and high loyalty, and therefore be a better university. Now, most of the examples that I shared with you today, obviously they're all enterprise examples, are all centered around what people are trying to do in the cloud. And what you heard common among almost all of these examples was speed. They all want to get to market fast. They all want to deliver a solution that's flexible and agile, they can adapt and they can do new things with. And that's very much what we see in our surveys, is that majority of the respondents who say why they went to the cloud give a speed response. This is really important for central IT to know and to think through, particularly when you're thinking about building your private cloud. What you'll notice right below all the speed, agility, and flexibility statements is cost. And this is more a belief than a reality. More people believe that going to the cloud will be cheaper. If you do it the right way, it absolutely will. If you do it the wrong way, not necessarily. Now, in terms of SaaS, we talked about SaaS being the largest segment so far. We're actually seeing SaaS get to the point where up to 25% of enterprises have SaaS applications already. You can see up on this sheet which applications are the most popular. We sort of see a first group, most of the names you would expect to see at around 25%. Right below that is a whole group that are already at 15%. When we look inside of enterprises as to how many SaaS applications they have on average, the average right now is somewhere between 4 and 8 SaaS applications that they know of. And this is where we're asking central IT, what do they know is being consumed? We know that what central IT knows and what the business is actually doing are not the same thing. There's a gap that exists between those two groups that we expect to expand over the next several years, particularly as cloud empowers business people to not need IT or check with IT before they do these kinds of things. We expect the number of SaaS applications that IT is aware of to jump in by 2015 to between 8 and 12 SaaS applications. But to give you a sense of how broad SaaS application adoption has been so far, one of our pharmaceutical clients decided to do an audit to find out how many SaaS applications were actually in use. How'd they do that? They went to finance and asked if they could look at the T&E records. And when they looked in the T&E records, they found not the 20 SaaS applications they thought were being used inside. They found 400. So there is a high degree of adoption of these services across the largest companies that are out there. So if you work for an enterprise today, the larger the enterprise, the more likely you're using SaaS and the more likely you're using a lot of it. Now, what I want to share with you for the rest of this presentation, and not all of it, but just the next section I'm going to do, is some details that came from a survey we just completed last quarter. This is a survey of cloud developers, meaning these are people who are directly responsible for managing an application running on a cloud today. If they don't have direct experience, they could not participate in this survey. They were screened out. Now, the interesting thing about the respondents that we had, there's only about 106 respondents in here, but that it is statistically a significant number. About 40% of the respondents work for an enterprise. The rest tend to work for the high-tech industry, small businesses, or independent organizations. So you're getting a pretty good feel for the enterprises and the results I'm going to share with you. What cloud are they using to deploy their custom applications on? You've probably heard all over the place, Amazon's the biggest player here. Here's the hard evidence that shows how much of a #1 player Amazon is in the market today. In fact, if you take a look about 4 listings down on here, you'll see Amazon Services. That's also Amazon Web Services. The difference in what the 2 responses are here is that the first line is EC2, which is specifically their infrastructure as a service offering. Amazon Services includes a whole bunch of add-on services that you can also consume within that environment. Things like their DynamoDB, things like S3, things like hosted databases, SAP environments, Hadoop environments, and so forth. So what you're seeing is Amazon is not just 71% of the responses here. They're close to another 10 to 15 points on top of that as well. Now, obviously, this looks like sort of one company's market. And oftentimes, if you look at disruptive technologies in their early days, there's one company who gets it right and really pulls things forward. But a whole bunch of other players get in here. So when we start to look at who have you not used and you're considering using in the next year, we see that there's really no clear leader. There's a whole bunch of other clouds they may tap into that they've heard about, that they're willing to try, but it's not at all clear that one of these organizations is going to get it. Now, if they haven't tried Amazon, pretty likely they will. So that's very much going to play in their favor, but there's a wide open opportunity here in a very early market. Now, when we ask them why they would go to the cloud and what is most important to them, what we find is that they reflect pretty much the survey you saw before. They come here for speed. They come here because it matches what they're trying to do. It allows them to work flexibly. It fits what they're trying to do. But if you look through all 6 of the listings here of today's reasons they're there, what don't you see? Cost. They don't care. They don't care because they're trying to get their job done as quickly as possible. The other reason they don't care, it's not their budget. These guys are going to use the cloud, they're going to T&E it back to the business, and the business is going to pay for it. So they're not all that concerned about the cost. Now, if you look at the next column, which is in the future, which is we asked them basically in the next 12 months, how would your priorities change? You actually see cost comes up here a little bit. But notice how it comes up. Lower cost than on-premise environment. That does not say it saves me money. What it does say is that I'm using this environment because I know it's cheaper, which means I'm getting ready to have to do a defensive move inside my own company and tell them why I won't use their resources. That speaks very much to the gap that we see growing between IT and the business, where IT has overladen with systems, technologies, ITIL processes, everything else that they're doing, that they cannot respond at the speed of business. And so business looks elsewhere. That's very much what we see here, and that's probably the biggest thing you should take away. Now let's flip this a little bit. Let's look at what they don't care about. So if we look at the things that they don't care about, flipping the list over, at the very top of the list, the thing that they're least interested and worried about is recommendation from a trusted advisor or collaborator. That seems really weird, doesn't it? Why is that the last thing they worry about? They're innovators. Their peers, the people they collaborate with, they're not innovators. They're finding a new peer group. They're going in a new direction, and they're listening to new people. That's what's happening here in this cloud, which makes it very much a disruptive technology. Next one on the list, corporate mandate or standard. They don't care. If you say you will use the private cloud, nope, sorry. You will use a particular cloud, nope, sorry. So you can't think if you work in central IT that you can influence these guys by simply saying thou shalt. Now, how many of you are parents? Does thou shalt work at all in your lives? Why would you think it would work at work? And look at the future. So in the future, mandate goes to dead last. So these guys are getting to the point where they're sort of, again, building up this defensive mechanism. So they said before, in the future, I need to prove that the cost is better. In the future, I need to prove that their mandate won't work. This is very much how they're thinking. This is what we tend to call DevOps. So if you've heard that term, DevOps refers to not what IT thinks it means. IT tends to think that it means kumbaya, dev and ops working together, making things happen for the company. No, DevOps is a declaration of independence by development, saying I have just enough operational skills, and the clouds do all the rest of the operational tasks that I don't need you operations guys. Which is why you've heard a variance on DevOps called no-ops, because that's exactly what they're trying to say. So it's this mindset around these developers that you really have to understand, because they're the ones who are driving this new revolution. They're the ones who are disrupting the organization. Now, they aren't building big portfolios in the cloud yet. So as I mentioned, we're still pretty new here. So if you look at this chart up here, the big 31% that you see in orange, that's only 3 to 5 apps. So I'm not putting a whole lot of stuff up here. I'm not building this massive portfolio. Only the dark gray, which is really 16% of this chart, that is 10 or more applications. So this market's just getting started, which is why you saw that ramp sort of low, but then just starting to peak up a little bit on the chart before. So that's the pattern that we're starting to see. Now, what languages are they using? I'm not surprised that some of the lightweight languages used for mobile and social applications are popular, JavaScript, Ruby, Python. But look how high Java and C# are. Those are the two core enterprise languages used to build enterprise-class applications. Those are really big. And in terms of using more of this, you see that in the blue, you see that in the orange. Java is going up. There's going to be a lot more use of that going on in this environment. What types of applications are they building? Kind of all across the board. Internal business applications, that's number one. We talked about test and dev in the past. Test and dev continues to be a big part of what you see them doing here. Integration, so that means they're tying what they're doing in the cloud to things that are not in the cloud. They're doing quite a bit of that. And of course, mobile and marketing sites and HPC and other things I mentioned are here as well. What are they doing? What are they leveraging to do this? I talked about infrastructure services a lot more popular than platform as a service. The 3 bars that you see that are listed as crucial in orange and highest, that's infrastructure as service. Compute, storage, and access to a database. That's pretty standard capabilities in an infrastructure service. But if you look at the rest are starting to move up. There's some use, there's some incidental use, but not a whole lot of it. So if I delivered platform as a service, what I deliver to you is middleware. So I have a managed message queue, I have maybe a mobile backend, I might have middleware, an app server, all that stuff provided to you. And there's not a lot of adoption of that. So that's why platform as a service is not as appealing so far. Also, most platform as a service up to this point have been lock-in, and developers don't really like being locked in. Now, if we look at where they're going to go in the future, and we look at the blue lines here, which is going to be crucial in the next 12 months, you see that it's going to become crucial that a lot of these middleware or PaaS-type capabilities are actually provided. What this essentially says is that the market right now, for the amount of developers out there in the world who can totally manage and maintain the middleware, the dev tools, all of that themselves, that's a pretty small pool. That's the early adopters. As we expand and we get more and more developers into this pool, we start to bring in people who just have C# skills, who just have Java development skills, who really can't set up and configure the middleware and all that. They want that stuff provided for them, which is why we expect to see in 2013 the destruction of the platform as a service category as a standalone category. And instead, we're going to see infrastructure as a service plus. And you've already seen the initial moves here. Microsoft, who entered the market as platform as a service, now has infrastructure as a service. Google did exactly the same thing. Salesforce is rapidly expanding and building on capabilities to give you both infrastructure service value and platform as a service value. And you're going to see that happen in enterprises, and you're going to see that happen from the ISPs as well. That's all on their lips right now, is to try and move into that space. Now, data. Data has been one of those hot topics. Most security officers are scared to death of this one. And the belief by most people is that, well, we don't have to worry about it because all those applications in the cloud, they're all using public data. And our survey actually backs that up. The majority of the use of data is public. However, we have a few more bars on the same screen. And what you're seeing here, as you get further and further away from public data, is the data becomes more and more proprietary, more and more key intellectual property. And as we slide down into this part of the chart, you actually start to see a lot more interest. So look at the blue bars. What are they going to start using in the next 12 months? Public goes way down. Done that. Don't need to do more of that. But everything else looks like there's an increase. So if you look particularly at core business transactions, that means online transaction systems. That means taking orders. That means doing e-commerce. That means changing records inside of the core databases. That's what's moving up. And that is your core assets. So if you think you can sort of not worry about security in the cloud for a while, you got to think again. Private clouds. Most of the developers we spoke to had access to a private cloud inside of their organization. But the key question here is it really a private cloud? How do we know that this isn't just cloud washing of the virtualization environment? Well, we got that data too. So if we look inside of organizations about where they're prioritizing their money, we hear loud and clear from our IT buyers that they are absolutely interested in building out a private cloud. So what you're seeing here in the dark blue sections is high priority and critical priority for the next year. And we find that every time something is listed as critical, it is given a budget. And about 75% of the time something listed as high is also given dedicated budgets. They're spending money this year and next year on building out a private cloud. But before we get too excited about this number, because it's pretty attractive, we have to look at what else is a priority in these organizations. And when we do that, we see that a lot of things that sound like they are prerequisites for cloud, consolidating the environment, blowing out more virtualization into our environment, expanding on automation, those are all higher, quite a bit higher. And as a result, because they are quite a bit higher, it basically says to us that we haven't done these things yet, or we're not done doing these things yet. And if you haven't done these things yet, you're not doing a cloud. Forget it. It's not going to happen. And notice what's right below, we're going to build a public cloud. Well, if we kind of don't pull that off, we're going to the public cloud. So there is a ticking clock right at the back of the head of the virtualization administrator that says, you're going to get that private cloud up and running, right? Because if you don't, guess who's over your shoulder? And that actually creates an unrealistic pressure. Because if you really want to build a private cloud, you have to actually build out the cloud. And it's different than virtualization. Here are the key things that make it different. First of all of your standard operating procedures to deploy, manage, and maintain, and then pull out workloads out of the virtualization environment must be standardized, meaning that you have written down and documented exactly how they're done, and when the main administrator goes on vacation and another guy steps in, he does it exactly the same way. Now, any of you think in your organizations today, does that sound familiar? Well, we're not off to a very good start. The next thing you have to do is, if it's standardized, if it is a procedure that's done exactly the same way, why is somebody doing it? Why is it not handed over to automation? Why is it not automatically happening so there's no human error in those procedures and processes? That's step number 2 in the cloud. So you have to get to the point where all these routine procedures are highly automated. The third thing that you have to look at is who is going to access this and what kind of speed of access do they want? The public clouds give all the developers self-service access, which means they can go to a page, request the resources, and boom, the resources are deployed. IT has to do exactly the same thing. And this is very, very uncomfortable for IT shops. Typically when I say, why don't you provide a self-service portal to your developers, I get back a very simple response. Chaos. These guys will run amok, they'll consume all the servers, they'll put workloads in there I can't support, I'll have no idea what they're doing. That would absolutely be true if you were not standardized and automated. Because the only thing a self-service portal is allowed to deploy is that which has been automated. So what you don't automate can't be deployed. And that is the key to getting cloud right and using the self-service portal as your tool and your advantage. So a lot of companies pay attention to this. Now, the last thing that you have to pay attention to is the economic model. And there's one power that clouds have over all central IT departments that none of the IT departments can touch. Do you guys know what it is? Give you a hint. Money. Now, exactly right. It's how you bill it. So we, of course, in central IT, we could certainly put up some sort of charge. You know, if you need something, it's $5,000. Help yourself. That's not going to really change things. What changes things in the cloud is not the pay-per-use, although that in itself is very powerful. It's the flip side of that. What clouds do is because they show you the bill all the time and because the meter is always running, they are incenting you to leave. And that is the power they have over the corporation. And that's the power you actually need inside of your cloud, which is why cloud is a different environment. That is why it is disruptive. It is not something that you're going to turn your entire data center into. The cloud is meant to be a dynamic, highly standardized, automated environment that it always incents you to get out. So it means that the applications that fit there are applications that have elasticity, meaning that they consume resources in this sort of back and forth fashion, or transiency, meaning they don't need to be running all the time. Maybe they're applications that fire up at the end of the quarter as you close the quarterly books, or are tied to a marketing plan or program that's only going to be running during the time of the program. That is what belongs in a cloud. And the key way for an enterprise to deliver this incentive to leave is to put all of the businesses in the same pool, not carve out pools for everybody. So think about it like a pitcher of water versus a bunch of glasses of water. If all I have is a bunch of glasses of water for each individual business unit, and they're all fully isolated from one another, I'm going to have some who constantly want more water, like engineering or R&D. Then I'm going to have other organizations that sort of never touch the amount of water that I've given them, and so their utilization is horrible. And then I'm going to have other groups that are going to not use a whole lot of water until they do, and then they want all the water they can possibly get. Well, if I'm trying to manage all these silos, there's no way I'm going to get a high utilization rate. And if I can't get a high utilization rate, I can't justify the pricing in a pay-per-use model in the cloud. If I have a pitcher of water, everybody takes the amount of water that they want, and it's all coming out of the same pool. I can raise the utilization of that pool dramatically. And that's the last piece you have to get right if you want to get a private cloud right. How many enterprises are there today? 8%. Good job. So 36% are budgeting for this. Only 8% in our surveys and all our analysis now actually have a private cloud. So we've got a ways to go. Now, here's the data. So I won't spend a lot of time on this to show that explains why this is the case. What journey they have to go on? They have to go on this journey. It's a journey in which you go through these stages of use of these technologies, and you have to hit thresholds at the end of each of these stages that really push you culturally up to the next stage. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but we could do a whole complete session specifically on that. Here's a couple takeaways I want you to get from this. If you're trying to build a private cloud based on what you have running today in your static virtualization environment, that's an okay exercise and one you absolutely should do, because the benefits of trying to build a cloud, the standardization, the automation, the self-service and all that, will benefit your static environment as well. So there's benefits to doing that. But if you want to get a cloud right and you want to get there quickly, then you really need to not just transform, but also build the end state. And building the end state is really critical. That means taking something that looks and acts exactly like a cloud and setting it up next to your virtualization environment. And I highly recommend disconnecting it from your help desk, disconnecting it from your ITIL processes, disconnecting for anything that might turn it back into a non-cloud environment. Over time, you can weave those things together. Now, what does that mean? I talked about the cloud is going to be a separate environment. Well, I've already got a physical environment with applications I can't virtualize. Now I've got the static virtualization pool, which I got VM sprawl in, and there's workloads constantly coming and going from that, which I can alleviate a little bit with this cloud. Well, but we're also outsourcing. We're outsourcing SaaS, we're outsourcing in the traditional sense, and there's this public cloud. And all of these have different and independent values. I want to use all of these things, but now my life has become chaotic. Well, there's a reason that your life has become chaotic, because everything you do inside of your data center is an explicit use of capital expense dollars. You mean to capitalize these resources, you're going to consume them, and you're going to amortize them over a 3 to 5 year period. So that's the way you should think about applications get deployed there. If they're going to stay here and these resources are justified in having them, that's a CapEx expenditure. But your CFO is much more interested in the other side of the coin. He'd much prefer to get to a point where he's doing operating expense expenditures, not capital expenditures. Now, if there's no change in the time frame, meaning that I spend OpEx dollars but I'm committed for 3 to 5 years, that's not very interesting either. So you have to be able to move to a flexible OpEx model, which is what he really wants. He wants to turn up and turn down the spend based on business cycles. And that's exactly what cloud will deliver to you. So you have to have that element as part of your overall portfolio. The way to manage all of this is to put a centralized tool on top. That is a centralized decision tree to help you decide what applications should go where. And then you want workload automation that is going to ensure that when the application goes to the right place, it goes with the right security, it goes with the right availability, the right people are monitoring it, it's using the right architecture, and it's going to succeed where it's been targeted. So that is what long-range enterprises need to be thinking. How do I get to this picture as rapidly as I can, and how do I start building out systems that get me there? Now, I'm short on time, and I want to leave you with an interesting thought. This is a change that we're seeing in the market right now, and one that I think you're going to see us write about very shortly here, and we'll probably start stimulating some conversation. So feel free to grab me during the break if you want to talk about this topic. If you look back in history of the IT department, we've created silos. And I blame EMC for this, I blame Cisco for this, but in general, we've created a bunch of silos. We have administrators who are specialized in these areas. They do these things really, really well, but they don't tend to collaborate really well. And this became problematic, and something came along to try to change this. And what came along was VMware. In the early days of VMware, they actually created this sort of neutral platform where workloads could be deployed on top of all of this. And there was one of these administrators who stepped up and took this on, which was a server administrator. So he moved up, and he became the virtualization manager. And if you look inside of most organizations today, the guy who stepped up from the x86 and Windows administration part of the business and is in this role, he's now king of the kingdom. He's the guy who has the ear of the CIO. He's the one who's driving all the savings and cost efficiencies through consolidation and virtualizing of workloads. He's the guy who gets to call the shots. Because he's the guy who gets to call the shots, all the rest of these guys aren't real thrilled with him. Because he's making their life hell. He's telling me what to do in storage. No, I know what's right in storage. He's telling me what to do at the network when I've got all this cool networking capabilities that I don't know. And by the way, he doesn't know enough about those two functionalities to really tell me what to do. It's quite annoying. Well, one person is really annoyed, and that's the app dev manager. He's annoyed because he's being told, you have to virtualize, you have to get on this platform, and he was promised a lot that didn't get delivered. He was promised, I can get it faster, I can get it cheaper, I can get it more automated, I can get it more flexible. What happened? Come on, guys. When I did business with you 2 years ago, I could get a VM in 15 minutes. Now, it takes 6 weeks. Why? Well, here's my problem. See those guys below? I can't get the network in time. I can't get the storage in time. It's a 6-week process. Well, app dev has an answer. We'll go around you. Where? To the cloud. And as a result, they're actually creating what we think is going to be a new role in the IT organization, the cloud manager. And this is going to be someone who is going to manage the cloud resources, the cloud consumption, and these services that are out there. Which means that virtualization manager, he's about to get disrupted. All right, final things, final recommendations for you. If you're in the SaaS world or you're thinking about SaaS, the key thing to focus here is that the business buyer is the one who buys these things. That's the person you have to appeal to. If your solution does not appeal to them, you're not going to get sold in. But we are seeing increasingly that IT is interested in managing SaaS services overall, so expect them to be involved in the final sales process. If they're not there initially, they will be as you expand the footprint inside of the organization. And really build SaaS. Don't build what I hear a lot of people call SaaS. If your application is not multi-tenant, if you don't have it deployed once supporting lots of customers, then you are doing what's called ASP or hosting, and you will have much higher costs than the SaaS providers that are out there. Long term, that'll destroy your business. Be prepared for that. That's how you maximize economies of scale. Next, if cloud developers, if you're trying to target cloud developers or you are a cloud developer and you're looking for which cloud to use, find an ecosystem play. Ecosystem plays are critical. This means that part of the reason Amazon is so successful with what they do right now is not because they create awesome services by themselves, is that there are hundreds and hundreds of SaaS applications that are also running there, of platform as a service elements, cloud services that also run there as well. And as a developer, I can dive into that community and I can tap into all of these services all on the same platform. They're all at LAN speed talking to each other. There's no charges for moving data between these services. It's all one massive ecosystem. That's a very, very big play. So if you look at things like Microsoft Azure, they're trying to do that with all the Windows ecosystem and bring them all together. If you look at OpenStack, OpenStack is trying to do in an open source way a repeat of the Linux model where this massive community takes this technology forward and all participates in it. Ecosystem plays are really, really critical. If you don't think you can be a cloud, be in an ecosystem. And then on the private cloud side, you really need to understand how developers think because they're the consumers of the cloud. It is not the CIO. It is not the enterprise architect. It is not the VP of infrastructure. None of these guys are going to use this. So if they're telling you how to build the cloud and it's counter to what you know the developers want, you have to push back. You have to get this right if you want to be successful from here. And you have to be thinking hybrid from day one. Your private cloud will not be an island, and your private cloud will not 100% satisfy the needs of the developers, so they don't also need the public cloud. Enough to chew on? All right. Thanks for your time.
Fantastic.
Good.